deja vu, but it will stop in a second. We're very excited to have Cora Peters reading for us tonight. And I just have to tell you 3 things really quickly before we move on to the reading. So this weekend I was walking in downtown and I ran into a poet friend who said, who are you having this Wednesday? And I said, we're having Cora. And he said, oh, that's wonderful. Cora has been to every single launch in Limerick in the past who knows how many years and has supported so many poets and writers in Limerick. And so
who was this person?
It was Edward O'Dwyer, but don't tell him I told him. There we go.
Just talking about
That's excellent. Now I'll say your name every week, so you appear every month. Anyway, so we're delighted that it's Cora's turn today. So that was thing number 1. Thing number 2 was, this book is so good, and you'll hear it in a minute, that I missed my bus stop on the way back from Cora's launch reading it. I ended up way away from home. And yeah, so that's thing number 2, so go get it once you've heard more of it. And thing number 3 is, Marion usually sells all the books, but she wasn't able to be there for Cora's launch, so I'm sure she's delighted to be here tonight. But I ended up having to do the crazy sales that night, and so give Marion some of that pleasure tonight. Make her work for it. So, those were my 3 things tonight. I don't think I've forgotten anything.
No, like you've thrown Marion under the bus.
I have.
You've done all the important points.
Yes, there we go.
Cora, you have too many fans. We've run out of seating. A little bit rude, but it's okay. It's
Yeah.
exciting.
Yeah. And we'll welcome all of them, and we're very happy to have all of you, and we hope you'll sign up for the open mic. Yeah. So that's it. Let's give Cora a roaring round of applause.
Thank you, all of you who travelled the far distances. So I'm going to kick off proceedings tonight for the late and great, I'm going to read a poem for the late and great poet and White Witch Terry Murray, who was an integral part of the White House sessions here for so long, for so many years, and where I met her first. So this is for my friend Terry Murray. In the shadows of the whiskey wood, we virgins gathered. We spoke of friendship and how ours would endure, and we settled in the scorching dust. There, amongst the ghosts and photographs, we spoke softly of siren songs and dark and troubled souls, and the power of witchcraft and lust. We raised our glasses to the ancient oracles who veered your trail, and we drank and danced and laughed. Now, safer, stronger, bolder, your life became poems, and the people gathered to hear your words, beloved Terry, a gentle refugee from over trouble's border. Now, your February face, lean as an El Greco painting, speaks sadly of only yesterdays and one sorrowful tomorrow. You smoke a cigarette, and I'd swaddle your tiny frame in bed and kiss your forehead, tenderly as I would a child. My soul collapsed with sorrow. But today I see you, lit by a sheaf of sunflowers, and hear your voice, and I remember your smile from when your cheeks were full and fat, and I remember the madness, the laughter, and the rare old times, and I remember you singing and dancing in a flowery hat. Now, now I'll go to a story, and my stories are kind of essentially slices of cultural history, like kind of memories of time gone by, iconic faces and places around Limerick, just to keep those memories alive, really. So this is called the Children's Sanatorium. Time to bring out the big guns, said Granda, as he threaded my red woolen mittens on a string through the sleeves of my coat and wound a knitted muffler tightly round my neck, as we set off on our daily jaunt up O'Connell Street to the White House bar. As soon as we got to the door, we were hit by a lovely blast of heat. The proprietor, Raymond Leeson, always lit a coal fire in winter, and it was banked with slack and glowing. Today, there was something about the atmosphere that felt strange. Our pal Alfie, a tiny little man in a flat cap, wasn't on his usual bar stool at the end of the counter, where he always drank his whiskey and sang his songs. Lots of tall men stood around nodding their heads and muttering, "Heart of gold, salt of the earth, 1 in a million." The news had preceded us. Alfie was dead. Rounds of golden whiskey from the wood were called, and there was much clinking of glasses. I thought, this being dead must be a great thing. Everybody standing around drinking and saying nice things about you. But I was only 4 years old and hadn't grasped the concept of what being dead meant. But when Granda explained and I realised I'd never see Alfie again, I sobbed my heart out into Granda's chest. I loved Alfie. He always bought me a skinny dairy milk on Fridays and tickled my face and neck with his spiky whiskers until I roared with laughter. We stayed on a bit later that day because apparently a bird never flew on one wing, and we had to give Alfie a proper send-off. They drained the whiskey barrels dry that day. Before we left, Granda got an envelope from Eamon Leeson. I saw him putting money into it. "We'll take the scenic route," he said, and we headed for Limerick docks, Alfie's former place of employment. I loved the boats and the bustle and watching the squawking gulls circling the cargo ships. We went up to the harbour master's office and Granda gave him the envelope to pass on to Alfie's wife. Awful business, said the harbour master. I thought when Dr. Noel Brown brought in the free TB screening and built all those sanitariums round the country that the scourge of TB was finally behind us. TB, said Granda, sounding shocked. Yes, said the harbour master. He didn't seem to have any symptoms. I can only hope that he didn't spread them to his wife and those 7 little orphans that he left behind. Homeward bound, Granda put me under his coat to keep me warm, and we walked along the quays, where the quieter gulls perched along the granite bollards, and the blowing of the foghorn in the distance seemed to take on a more lonesome sound than ever. When we got in home, Nana was listening to the wireless and gave Granda a very frosty reception, but he pulled the sympathy card and told her about Alfie, and she wrapped her arms around him. The tea things had been cleared away, but Nana fried up a pan of sausages and put out a plate of fresh cottage bread, slathered with country butter from the market. I'd worked up quite the appetite after drinking all the creamy Guinness heads and having had the legs walked off me around Limerick. There was a big blazing fire lighting, and our little black and white terrier Bubba was stretched out on the rug in front of it, dozing. Nana was sitting in her green velvet armchair behind the fire, and when I'd finished eating my sausages, I went over and sat at her feet. I was stroking Bubba. Her fur was warm from the fire, and her belly was big and fat with the pup she was carrying. I was promised one of the pups, and it was all I could think about. Suddenly, I took a fit of paroxysmal coughing. I don't like the sound of that cough, Dolls, Nana said to Mama, and I was put to bed. Next morning, Ma brought me down to Barrington's Hospital on George's Quay to see Dr. Ann, the children's doctor. She examined me with her stethoscope and gave me a lollipop from a jar on her desk and sent me upstairs for an x-ray. It showed a shadow on my lung. My mother was sent home to get my nightwear as they were keeping me in hospital until my x-ray was reviewed by the specialist. The next morning, a beautiful nurse in a blue and white starch uniform came in to get me ready. She brushed my hair with a lovely soft brush and put it into 2 long plaits and put on my pink fluffy dressing gown and slippers. Then the hospital porter Donal arrived in and wheeled me off down the corridor in a wheelchair. I thought this was great fun and was urging him to go faster, but he wheeled me to a waiting ambulance at the back of the hospital. A thin bird-like nurse with ancient eyes accompanied me in the back of the ambulance, but never spoke. It felt like the longest journey of my life, and I had no idea where they were taking me. Eventually, the ambulance came to a halt, and the driver came round and opened the doors. "The children's sanatorium," he bellowed, and the nurse lifted me down. I looked up at a big, ugly concrete building high on a hill. It was girded by thickets of tawny gorse and surrounded by woodland as far as the eye could see. We were in the middle of nowhere. We climbed the steps of this fortress, and looming large in the doorway, adopting a militaristic stance, was a colossal beast of a woman, who the bird-like nurse addressed as Nurse Buckley. I was handed over in silence, no negotiations, no salutations. Nurse Buckley then grabbed me roughly by the scruff of the neck and dragged me down a long tiled corridor to an eerie Victorian bathroom with pale green terrazzo walls and floor tiles. She put on a brown rubber apron, the kind they wore in Shaw's slaughterhouse. Then she stripped me and flung me into a freestanding iron bath of freezing cold water. She took a bar of red carbolic soap off the shelf and started washing my hair with it. She soaked a huge sponge in the bath water until it was completely sodden, then squeezed it over the top of my head so that the soapy water came cascading down my face, burning the eyes out of me. She did this repeatedly and with gusto. It was akin to being waterboarded. This was to be the first of many of these waterboarding sessions, my own private Guantanamo Bay. I was then brought to a vast barn-like building with rows and rows of iron beds on either side, all occupied by pale, frightened children. I was put into one of those beds next to a girl named Patricia, a deathly white little girl with very fine ginger hair. Then the tea was served, a disgusting green plastic beaker of tepid milk that was definitely on the turn, a slice of bread and 2 shriveled up burnt sausages that I couldn't eat. I asked my new friend Patricia if she'd like them, and she said yes. So I jumped out of bed and rolled the sausages onto her plate. Suddenly, that terrorising old harridan Nurse Buckley came thundering down the ward, brandishing a large flat black hairbrush. She dragged me out of bed and thrashed me repeatedly until I was too exhausted to cry anymore. Brutal as these beatings were, there were times when the food was just too inedible and too revolting to be inedible, and I choose the beating as the lesser of the 2 evils. As the recommended part of the treatment here consisted of 24-hour bed rest, getting out of bed was punishable by beatings, with the further humiliation for the boys by the confiscation of their pyjama bottoms, sometimes for weeks on end. The poor little boys would be squirming, trying to hide their private parts while they were walking to the bathroom. Running wasn't permitted. Sometimes, due to crippling shyness, some boys would wet the bed. They were beaten, and their wet sheets were hung from their beds for the week to shame them further. Another part of the treatment was fresh air, and the high windows in the wards were left open 24 hours a day, even in the depths of winter. Nightfall brought the blackest darkness, and my fevered imagination conjured up all sorts of bears and wolves coming out of the forest to climb in the windows and devour me. Every night I lay in bed paralysed with fear, but in here you had to cry very softly. We weren't allowed any visitors for the first few months here, and it was a time of unbearable loneliness. When visitors were finally allowed, it was only on Sundays between 2 and 4. We would be pulled out of our beds on Sunday mornings, and our beds would be dressed in starch white sheets for the benefit of visitors. So we got to stay out of bed for a few hours while the good sheets were on. Nana always sent me Ladybird books and comics, the Beano and the Dandy, which I would swap with other children. I lived with the Sundays when my parents and Nana and Granda came to visit. Another family friend, Jimmy O'Connor, also came to visit. He was a school teacher, and he brought me a shiny red school case with thick hand stitching and silver clasps. He said it was for when I started school. When I opened it, it was full of sweets of every description: Rolos, Toffos, Smarties, Crunchies. When the visitors left and we were still out of bed while they were changing the sheets, I went around the ward with my school case and shared out my sweets with the other children. Nurse Buckley wasn't just cross. She was sadistic and constantly on the prowl for any perceived misdemeanours that she could punish us for. When she saw us eating sweets, she ran around with her eyes blazing and snatched all the sweets and chocolates out of our hands. Then she made us all line up at the bathroom sink and wash our mouths out with carbolic soap to take away the taste of the chocolate. I had never felt such dread, but also I was going out of my mind with boredom. I was a wild and spirited child, and this 24-hour bed rest was torture. One day a big grey cat got in and walked around the ward. We were elated. This is the most exciting thing to happen since I got here. Next to that was Christmas morning. Santa came around with a sack on his back, handing out presents. He gave me a cloth doll with a hard shell-like plastic face. The rest of Christmas Day must have been pretty unremarkable because I don't remember anything else about it. Only that the windows were opaque with frost and it was cold, bitingly cold, and our breath came out like puffs of smoke. St. Stephen's Day, Nurse Buckley came around with a big sack and took away all the toys that Santa had given us. We never saw them again. One particular Sunday my parents were preparing to leave as visiting time was over, and my heart was breaking saying goodbye. Just then, a seldom seen senior nurse came down and asked my parents if they'd like to take me home. My heart nearly stopped. Could this really be happening? As this news was sprung on my parents, they hadn't any clothes to bring me home in. Dad had took off his overcoat and bundled me up in it and ran down the big concrete steps with me in his arms. It was dusk by the time we got on the road, and almost dark by the time we got home to our new house. It had big gates into it, 2 gardens and a yellow front door. Dad had kept me in and kept me concealed under his coat to surprise everybody. Granda was dozing in his armchair. Nana was clearing off the table. "Look what I found under the bushes," Dad said, and pulled back his coat to reveal me. There was great excitement. I jumped down and ran over to Granda and dived on top of him. Then I ran to Nana to hug her. She had tears running down her face. Mama brought me upstairs to the bath to wash the hospital off me. Then back downstairs, Dad had heated my pyjamas to the fire. Then Mama wheeled in a silver cross pram and parked it in the corner of the sitting room. "This is your new brother Eamon," she said. And I had never seen a more beautiful baby. He had golden skin and white blonde hair and was dressed in a yellow romper suit. I held his little hand and he smiled up at me. Mama said it was his first smile and that he'd saved it for me. Then another surprise was revealed, our first television set. Dad switched it on and a cartoon duck named Dotty Locka marched across the screen. He was wearing striped swimming trunks, but we couldn't tell what colour they were, as Ireland in the early 60s had only one television channel, Television, and it was only broadcast in black and white. Their first colour broadcast wasn't until 1968. Mama made cocoa for us all and I snuggled in with Granda watching the funnies. Could this day get any better? It could, and it did. I was told that they'd kept one of Bobo's pups for me. That she was bigger than a pup now and was asleep in her warm bed in the shed. It was too dark and too cold to go out, so I'd have to wait until the morning to see him and to explore the garden. When it was time for bed, Dad had filled the Cheney hot jar and wrapped it in a towel so it wouldn't burn me and put it into my bed. Before I got in, I ran across to the window and pulled the curtains aside to peer out to see if I could see anything. It was too dark, but it was a friendly darkness, like licorice studded with stars. A stream of light from the bedroom window fell on the new swinging post that Dada had made for me, and I could make out the outline. Mama came in and turned out the big light and left a yellow-coloured lamp on in the corner. She tucked me in between the warm candy-striped winter sheets and sat on the side of my bed. I gave her a kiss and a love on her cheek, and she stroked my hair until I drifted off to sleep. Unfortunately, it was not to be a peaceful sleep. The horrors of my stint in the children's sanatorium invaded my dreams. The little girl who went away a year ago to Foynes was wild and spirited. The little girl who returned suffered violent nightmares and woke up screaming out in terror in the middle of the night. Now, there's enough misery. Follow that with something more light-hearted, I think, and we will go to Tommy Fitz's punk shop. Now, the older people among us might remember Tony Clark's bookshop there in the corner of Thomas Street and Little Captain Street. I think it's Carlton Coffee now, but at the side of that there was steps down, and there was a lot of people didn't even know it, but there was this big basement. There was a punk and goth shop, and at the time, like Limerick, I think there was a recession going on and mass immigration, pretty grim, like, but. And there was only a few of us, like goths and punks in the town, like about 3 of us, I'd say, in Limerick, and people were looking at us, we were fish out of water and everything. And we found this place, and Tommy Fitz had come back from London, and he sourced all his clothes from there, and all the punks and goths came from all over Ireland, and this is where they'd meet, and you think, walking down the grey streets of Limerick, down here, it's brilliant, like. So we all met down there, and we'd sit around. Tommy was a DJ, the deck set up, and all the coolest music, and we'd sit around kind of smoking all sorts and drinking red wine, kind of, that was a thing, like, because I think because it looked like blood or something. We were kind of that mind, like, but that was it. So I just wrote this poem, Tommy Fitz's Punk Shop. Limerick, early 80s. We were punk rock, knee-high docks, multicoloured mohawk locks, counter-culture, dark wave goth. We rocked, but we were lost. And all we had were chips and spliffs and acid trips, mavericks, misfits. Then Tommy Fitz, the coolest man in Ireland, opened up a punk shop in his basement. And I found my tribe, imbibed with scribes, got drunk with punks, smoked pot with goths. The Ramones, Susie Sue and Johnny Rotten, all on cotton t-shirts on the wall. Black lights, fishnet tights, bondage pants of polyvinyl chloride draped in chains. Then Tommy put the records on, the Smiths, the Slits, the London Calling album signed by every member of the Clash. And Robert Smith to Miss You, Kiss You, Love Cats. Cool cats, we lounged and listened to the tunes and lived our life. You brought a piece of London home to Limerick, Tommy Fitz, and I'm relatively sure you saved my life. So now we will sashay down Rue Nicolai, as Darrow O'Malley calls it, down Nicholas Street and to the Treaty Cafe. After a night on the town in Limerick, no finer place to go for sustenance than the legendary Treaty Cafe on Nicholas Street. The proprietor, Richard Coughlin, was a brilliant historian and an aficionado on all genres of music. In 1960s and 1970s Ireland, show bands were prevalent, and at the height of their popularity, at least 800 bands travelled up and down the roads, playing the various lavish ballrooms of romance dotted around the country. They drew in and entertained huge crowds that travelled from miles around for their shows. The only problem was that every eating establishment was closed by 10 p.m. and there was no place for the musicians to eat or to rest for a while after their gigs. There were no motorways at the time, and some of them faced long and arduous journeys. Richard was very mindful of their safety and their need to eat, so he decided to keep the Treaty Cafe open until 5 a.m, but more often than not it stayed open all night. In appreciation, the show bands donated signed photographs, posters and music memorabilia which adorned the walls, and it became a vibrant social hub for musicians to socialise and share stories. A lot of these show bands had up to 10 members, with a brass section, a rhythm section and a combination of trumpets, trombones and saxophones. They were considered huge stars in their day, and many had brought out records, usually 7-inch singles, and Richard would play them on a record player in the corner. Groups of girls would gather there to drink coffee, just to see their musical idols and listen to their records. There was always a great buzz there until Lent, when there was a distinct lull in activity. The Catholic Church held huge power over social behaviour, and liturgical laws dictated that every ballroom and dance hall had to remain closed for the 40 days and nights of Lent. As a consequence, there was a mass exodus of show bands from our shores who went to England and America for work and returned for the Easter Sunday gigs. 4 of the show bands from that time, Joe Dolan and the Drifters, the Miami with Dickie Rock, the Freshmen and the Royal Show Band, have since been honoured by An Post with 4 commemorative stamps, such as the esteem they were held in. The late 1970s saw the decline of the show band era. After the brutal killing of 3 Miami show band members in July 1975, as they were returning from a gig in Banbridge in Northern Ireland, cross-border touring dropped significantly, and many of the bands revamped into smaller outfits and played in local pubs. Hotels also started putting on live music, cabaret and discos, and of course had full alcohol licenses. The ballrooms and dance halls couldn't compete, as they only had mineral balls, or mineral bars. All of these factors accelerated the demise of the show bands. The 1980s gave way to a more eclectic clientele in the Treaty Cafe, and night owls from all over Limerick gathered here after gigs in the Savoy, or one of the popular nightclubs, Ted's, The Basement or Fernando's, always trying to carry on the party and extend the night. One such evening we were socialising there after an event in the bell table. When our food was delivered to our table, Mike Finn, the playwright, flicked over the fried egg that was on his plate, and on the bottom of it was a daddy longlegs, perfectly splayed and fried onto the bottom of the egg. Mike called Mary, a lovely smiling lady who worked there for years, and showed her the egg. "Oh, sorry, love," she said. And she picked up his knife and scraped the daddy long legs off the egg. Then she wiped the knife on her apron and set it back in its place. Now, love," she said, and went about her business. Didn't eat the egg, by the way. Another time, somebody brought in a horse, and they led him down between the booths to the end of the restaurant. But they couldn't turn him around to get him out, as the space was too narrow. So people climbed in front to push him, like they were pushing a car, to try and back him out. And this horse was a full-size beast, and he was blocking off the last few booths so people couldn't get out of their seats. So there was a big kerfuffle with people scrambling over the backs of the seats. Crockery smashed to the floor, slices of liver went flying to the air, fried eggs splattered on the ground, and chips and all sorts of greasy food were scattered all over the floor. Because of this, the floor was like a skating rink, and people were slipping all over the place, hopping off the ground and falling on top of each other, like a full-on slapstick comedy routine. The rubber bandits sang about having a horse outside. The Treaty Cafe won't one better than a horse inside. If everyone who fell that night had put in a claim, Richard's insurance would have gone through the roof. But thankfully, these weren't the litigious times we live in now. They were simpler times, and people were kind. At the end of each evening, Richard would bring the homeless people in and feed them, or hand out parcels of food to them. There's a myriad of stories about the Treaty Cafe, and it seemed like there was always something funny happening here. We spent a lot of our time here laughing. But there was more to 13 Nicholas Street than chips and giant-sized mixed grills. Upstairs is Richard's private museum and library. I was privileged to have been shown around it, and it was mind-blowing. Going to the doors was like taking a step back in time. There was a vast collection of books, signed first editions, antiques, literary and historical memorabilia, and cultural artifacts. And he took the time to elaborate on their origins and the stories behind them. It was fascinating to listen to him. It was a truly magnificent collection. So I'd say never judge a book by its cover or a building by its facade, because this building housed an absolute treasure trove. Sadly, Richard passed away in April 2001, and his treasured collection went to auction to be appreciated by new collectors. 13 Nicholas Street no longer trades as the Treaty Cafe, but its walls must hold thousands of ghosts and thousands of memories of the glory days here. And in the midst of the historic medieval quarter of Limerick, the Treaty Cafe stands as a beloved and unequivocal piece of cultural history. So I'll conclude now with the cashmere coat, and this is about, do you know when loved ones die and you have to pass on their clothes and their coats and that, and you just kind of hope, that you don't bump into somebody that's wearing them, like, you know. So it has been known to happen. So I'll start with this now. So the cashmere coat. The cashmere coat. I thought it was you when I saw your cashmere coat that Christmas Eve on Bond Street, and I followed you. I marked you in the distance, terrified you'd stray, my breath became untamed. My ears heard nothing but the rushing gush of blood. The shopper is now a mute ballet. The vines around my memory fell away, and vineyards of our life spilled out unfettered, and brought me back to winter in Berlin. Remember, it was there I bought the coat for you, my winter soldier, and how it bristled in the frost atop the Reichstag, whilst you smoked a Captain Black cigar and nipped on gin. Now, passing the Eden Gallery, I see the face reflected, stunningly grotesque from within a crystal frame layered upon a photographic image. A Jonas Lariche, Baroque Act 1. Your cashmere coat, less blessed by a frail and famished frame, smelt of dampness and sweet afton. The mapping of his face, shaped by a life amongst the ragged people, shone sallow in the low-hung winter sun. Now, driven by compulsion and intrigue, I follow to a Bona Bijou bar. You're sitting drinking whiskey and speaking in the long-forgotten language of Polari, to old friends lost in time. Nantilate, violente, lista. Your cashmere coat takes on another life, to keep this old gent warm and live his story. I knew that I would think of him often, and pray that he was safe. At the crossroads of our little Bohemia, I turn east into the street and with a lonesome feeling head for Charing Cross station. Now, that's it. So.
Thank you so much, Cora. Let's give Cora another round of applause. Thank you, Cora, for reading for us tonight.
And thank you for inviting the door.